Hello. Terence Crawford is referred to by many as the pound-for-pound king. Whenever he fights, it can sometimes look like he's close with his opponents, then all of a sudden you can hear him quietly say, "This isn't even my final form." From there, he switches stances, you hear this music out of nowhere, his eyes flash into Ultra Instinct, and he just becomes this different tier of fighter. Boom. Just like that, he completely throws his opponents off. They can't gauge him the same way anymore. And that's been a common theme throughout Terence Crawford's career. When he first wanted to train though, when he wanted to train in this way, his coaches actually didn't want to teach him southpaw. They were confused as to why he kept switching stances.
I remember getting in trouble because I used to always switch him. My coach used to always say, "You need to worry about fighting the one style first and perfecting that before you try to switch and do a different style." But I'll always switch, so it got to the point where they was just like, all right, well, you gonna fight like that, we gonna train like that. It was just naturally. It was just like, all right, this not working, so I gotta do something else.
It's just, in his heart, he knew he had to do it. He just kept switching and just kept being disagreeable until they said, fine, we'll train you as a switch hitter. Now, this is very important for us to know. One of the most important things for a student is to be coachable, because if they are disagreeable, the attitude can cause bad tendencies, cause simple mistakes, which will end up being noted, thus exploited. In the end, you'll just be a fraction of what you are truly capable of. This is an integral component as to why humility and respect are cornerstone to the martial arts, because if you can't be open to the possibility that you have much to learn, you will never learn anything unless you are made humble by real-world experience. And often, from that experience, the moment those kinds of people are taught, they never want to come back afterwards. Their ego was hurt too badly, it was too big of a drop. Their sense of status, their ego was just hurt way too much for them to show their face again. But, there are advantages to being disagreeable as well. Luckily for fighters like Israel Adesanya, after he tried and tested a more orthodox style, he just felt he should transition to a hands-down style, and Eugene Behrman decided to work with it. Most of us though, we all know that when you try to do something different, you'll be met with conflict. Disagreeableness should be fueled by self-awareness in order to solve a problem. You shouldn't do something just because someone else is doing it. Your reasoning for why you do what you do should be derived from self-awareness. Having built some experience, you feel you'd have some advantages if you tried something a little different based upon your own unique aptitudes. Terence Crawford, he just knew he needed to mix things up. He knew he needed to find a way to make his style a bit more confusing, a bit harder to read, a bit harder to deal with, a bit harder to key onto. As a result, he became a rare case where, by being disagreeable, it became an advantage. Sometimes, if you see something from a grounded place, you need to voice your opinion even if it causes conflict, because the cost of not doing so would be something much greater. But that is a fine line. From what I can tell from the way Terence Crawford spoke, he wasn't trying to be a know-it-all at all. He was still very coachable. Him and his coach, Brian Bomack McIntyre, appear to still work great together. And it's because he wasn't trying to flex or preserve an ego. He wasn't trying to show something to make himself feel good. He just saw a problem and believed switch hitting would help him solve it. It wasn't ego and imitation to be cool or feel a status dynamic affected by constantly listening to and doing what someone else said. Instead, it was self-awareness and adjustment to solve a problem. Those are two very different things, and if a student cannot be coachable, say even if his coach complied, the student, he would still have a massive underlying issue in that he would not be able to humbly take in perspective to better refine his style. You do not want yes men surrounding you. That's the best way to keep yourself from growing. Thus, in that sense, being disagreeable is not the problem. It's the attitude. You stunt your own growth by being a know-it-all, because a mind that thinks it's full can never take in and use new information. Being disagreeable to some extent is very important for overall success. Here's an example. Being agreeable in the workplace is negatively linked to success. The disagreeable personality, on the other hand, has a much greater chance of succeeding. This is true in all facets of life. This is why all great fighters are unique. The one thing they all have in common is that they are all different. But the moment you're disrespectful, and the moment you're doing something for reasons impure to the situation, that's when it becomes a problem. But when we further explore this is also why men on average typically earn more as well. It's because we have higher testosterone and are more prone to being aggressive, more prone to conflict in general. Thus, we're more likely to engage in conflict for a better position in life. This is the innate advantage of being disagreeable. But what happens when you don't have leverage founded on experience? It is delusional narcissism. Delusional narcissists always get found out, one way or another. Knowing yourself and knowing what you can do, your worth, knowing that, it is one thing. You can reason from that place and convince someone else with leverage, so as long as you aren't being disrespectful. But if you don't have self-awareness established through experience, you are likely just being conflictive to preserve an ego. This in turn wastes people's time. It wastes your coach's time, and it wastes your own time, because you can't learn if you think you already know everything. You will not be able to use an outside source to help you add more clarity to your own vision. At that point, it is just the Dunning-Kruger effect. You think you know because you don't really know. That said, Terence Crawford may have been disagreeable, but nonetheless, he still has a very healthy relationship with his coach from what I can tell. It was out of necessity and self-awareness that fueled his disagreeable nature. He wasn't being disrespectful, and he wasn't being a know-it-all. Thus, when you see him fight, technically, he is still very sharp. He's clean out of both stances. His style is just beautiful in general. From what I can tell, Terence Crawford wasn't being conflictive to front an ego. It was out of necessity understood through self-awareness. Thus naturally, he is a man who's entered the bracket of more successful due to being disagreeable. But from there, he has still retained his status of being coachable. That's what it has to be. It has to be an appropriate balancing act where you can recognize and humbly take criticism and information from people who genuinely care for you, care about you, but also to be able to reflect on where you feel you could improve or get an edge, and respectfully bring it forward with the same reasoning you used to convince yourself. From there, having trouble with the jab from orthodox, Terence Crawford, he swapped to southpaw, pawing with his new dominant lead hand. He's hand fighting, limiting the options from his opponent's lead. Note how Terence Crawford is also subtly taking an outside angle. From there, he throws an overhand jab as he pivots his lead foot in. This pivot of the foot is what transferred tremendous body weight into his hip, thus into his lead hand. Pair that with the fact Kell Brook was coming in. The hand fighting, it worked. Muffling the jab, Kell Brooks, he decided to hard commit from the inside angle. Look, he's reaching with his backhand. The punch, it was predictably seen this caught, which, in turn, with the jab, mitigated its brunt. Boom. Kell, he's concussed. A perfectly timed lead with precision and fluid technique is dangerous, especially as a counter. From there, Terence Crawford, he begins to whip doom. Over and over again, up until the ref just has to call the fight. Terence Crawford is recognized as the pound-for-pound king by many. His skills and fluidity between stances is just straight up otherworldly. Technically, he's as remarkable as one can get. His skills pay the bills.
Skills pay the bills.
And when you hear him speak, he's supremely calm, supremely humble. That's just it. He has the calm, kind, humble poise of a man who is just straight up, truly dangerous. Clearly, he works well with his team. He listens to his team and respects them, but from what I can tell, he was disagreeable through self-awareness, and it was done so in order to solve a problem, a way of being less predictable derived from his own experienced judgment. In this sense, this is something we can all learn from. We should all strive to be a little more like Terence Crawford, conducting ourselves with calm, humble confidence grounded with experience, and of course fueling the disagreeable components to our nature with self-awareness, all in order to solve a problem, never to flex an ego. In this balance is the same poise possessed by the great Khan. As above, so below. Ruthless evisceration of enemies, all the while his own people loved and revered him. Respectfully, they worked together towards a common goal. To that end, thank you, Terence Crawford, for this lesson. Humans like you, rising to the top of the pound-for-pound list, the example you set makes all the people who pay attention just a little bit better. Thank you, Crawford. And to all of you watching, thank you too. Until next time, peace.